Both Indian and Mexican women had particular positions in society based on their birthright. Mexican women belonged to a higher class if they had more Spanish lineage, while Indian women were born into a specific caste that dictated their roles in society and whom they could marry. There is a stark difference in the lives of Brahmin and Dalit women, as well as Spanish and women with strong Black and Indian lineage. While the caste system had been around for centuries, the British highlighted the hierarchical differences through census polls that forced people to publicly identify with one caste. The Spanish conquistadors created different names and classes for the results of interbreeding between Spanish, Indian, and Black populations. These identifiers limited women's positions in society, marriage opportunities, and their children's opportunities. A suffocating patriarchal force has hung over the lives of Indian women for centuries. From all sections, castes, and classes of society, women were victim of its repressive, controlling effects. Those subjected to the heaviest burden of discrimination were from the Dalit, or scheduled castes, and are also known as the untouchables. Dalit women experienced multiple levels of discrimination and exploitation, much of which was degrading, appallingly violent, and inhumane. Caste refers to a traditional Hindu model of social stratification, which defines people by descent and occupation. As you go up the caste system, the power and status of a caste group increases. However, the lower castes have no power and are regarded as dirty and polluting. According to the UN, even today Dalit women are oppressed by the broader Indian society, men from their own community, and even their own husbands and male members in the family. Practices like Devadasi, where girls as young as 12 are dedicated to the Hindu goddess Yalama and sold into prostitution, honor killings, sexual abuse, appalling working conditions, and limited access to basic things such as water, sanitation, and employment are common. The British sexualized Indian women through their depictions of the harem. The harem portrayed the women as dark, mysterious, exotic sexual beings and played into European fantasies. This photograph depicts a harem woman. Photographs such as these often show the woman in a reclined suggestive pose with a hookah and are surrounded by luxurious fabrics. Another idea of the harem is that women were often kept secluded from men and the rest of the household. This was a very strong cultural difference that the British did not understand. However, high-born Indian women generally had the ability to culturally perform to be European through marriage, dress, education, and last name. The Indian elite associated themselves as closely with the British as possible so they could differentiate themselves from the lower castes. If they cooperated, they would often be monetarily rewarded and given some power. This privilege was not given to low-caste Indian women. Those born into a lower caste usually had no hope of progressing in life and were often faced with a hard life of labor, poverty, and adversity. In addition to the challenges women faced from the British, women were thought to be subordinate in Indian culture. This belief was deeply entrenched in Hinduism and Islam, the two major religions in India. According to the holy texts of Hinduism, women were meant to serve their husbands, fathers, and sons. In India, marriage is often arranged by the parents. As a result, child marriages are common throughout Indian history. Indian weddings, such as in this video, are often very lavish celebrations. When girls are married at a young age, they often drop out of school early. The Manusmriti, an ancient Hindu text, says that in life, a woman is half her husband, and if he dies, she is half dead. Hindus believe that when the soul of the wife inhabited some former body, she sinned, and in punishment for that sin, the evil spirits killed her husband. A widow has 3 choices she can make. She can throw herself upon her husband's funeral pyre to burn with the body. This is called sati. She can marry her husband's younger brother, or she can live out her days in isolation to atone for her sin that caused her husband's death. While great improvements have been made recently for widows' treatment and rights, historically widows were shunned from society and thought to bring bad luck to married women. The caste a woman is born into determined her entire life, whom she could marry, her status in society, and her lifestyle. The highest caste, Brahmin, were thought to be the closest to God, while the untouchables were shunned from society. These distinctions were only highlighted by the British when they conducted census polls which made Indians publicly identify with one caste. The Spanish invasion of North America and the Caribbean islands in the late 1400s and 1500s proved to be one of the most deadly and life-altering conquests in history. When the Spanish encountered native people, they read the Requerimiento, a document that told the native people in Spanish or Latin that they must submit themselves to Christianity and Spanish rule or they will be killed. While some Indians were murdered by the Spanish for resisting, most Indians were killed off by epidemics of smallpox, malaria, and yellow fever brought over by the white men. Despite all the death caused by the Spanish, perhaps the greatest tragedy for the Indian population was the loss of social standing and liberties they held before. Prior to social conquest, Native women had separate roles in society but were considered equal to men. However, the Spanish did not share these egalitarian beliefs. Women would become victims of double jeopardy, which caused them to lose their rights and were demoted in society to a far greater degree than their male counterparts. However, some women resisted their new social standing by rebelling, controlling the reproduction of children with the Spanish, and moving away to live in all-female locations in order to preserve their heritage, native religion, and freedoms. Native women countered colonization differently depending on their social class. The women of native nobility were often given as gifts to the Spanish conquistadors in order to make political alliances, while the peasant women were worked increasingly hard in order to meet the demands for tribute. There was a great deal of intermarriage between native Indians and the Spanish. There was almost no European women taken to the New World, so the Spanish men often had relations with the native women. Because a major part of the conquest was to convert the natives to Christianity, they were encouraged to marry the native women. This intermixing has long-lasting consequences for the people of Mesoamerica. La Malinche was a Nahua woman from the Mexican Gulf Coast, who played an important role in the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire, acting as the interpreter, advisor, lover, and intermediary for Hernán Cortés. She was one of 20 women sold to the Spaniards in 1519. Later, she became a mistress to Cortés and gave birth to his first son, Martin, who is considered one of the first mestizos, or person of mixed Spanish and Indian blood. One of the most lasting impacts of the Spanish conquest is the creation of mixed people from Spanish, Indian, and Black heritage. The Peninsulars from Spain and the Creoles, Spanish descendants born in the New World, made up the ruling class of colonial Mexico. A person held a higher rank in society if they were Christian and had more Spanish blood. For the children of Spanish men, this meant that their impurity and lesser social standing was the fault of their native, black, or mixed mother. Spanish features such as light skin were highly desirable as they alluded to more Spanish blood. Casta paintings were visual classifications of the types of people produced by mixing of the three races to satisfy the curiosity and entertain Europeans. While Spanish and Indian unions could produce a Spaniard on the third generation of descendants produced with only Spaniards, it is believed that blackness could not be entirely absorbed into Spanish lineage and that it ruined any chance of purity and a higher social ranking for future generations. These racial distinctions primarily placed the blame on women for tainting Spanish purity.